I rise to speak on the federal government's budget and to report on behalf of working families, seniors, and small businesses that I represent in New Brunswick Southwest. And I will join other Conservative MPs in voting against the Budget Implementation Act. We do so because the Liberal budget will make life more difficult and more expensive for Canadians. Liberal MPs measure success by how many tax dollars are being spent. They say the number of programs in this budget is what matters. Yet Canadians know and understand why more federal assistance is needed. It is because the government's overall management of the economy is failing. On the Liberals, Canadians are becoming poorer. The Liberal government is raising taxes every year on households and businesses. It's a government that spends so much, so quickly, that inflation roared back, raising consumer prices throughout the economy on households and businesses, making it harder to get by and harder to compete. As a result, Canadians are experiencing a cost of living crisis. It's especially painful on families, pensioners on a fixed income, as well as modest and low-income workers. Canadians don't approve of massive inflationary spending. Conservatives understand this. We recognize that out-of-control debt financing and taxes only hurts the country and hurts Canadians. But this is the Liberal plan. As well as I should note that Conservatives do not approve of the Liberal NDP coalition that barters tax dollars for confident votes so the Prime Minister can govern as if he won a majority when he did no such thing. We know the Prime Minister has no willingness to be fiscally responsible, nor is he even skilled at overseeing the government. The Liberals have increased spending on the public service, the running of the government, by 50%, and yet today, federal workers are out on strike in the largest job action in at least 40 years. And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, it takes a special sort of incompetence to accomplish both these things, to both ramp up spending more than $22 billion on the operation of government, and yet being in a position where taxpayers are receiving less but paying more. And even while the Prime Minister drops the ball on big items and the Cabinet passes these, the Liberal backbench cheers them on. Worse, taxpayers see a leader, a government that doesn't even care about ethics. My constituents are certainly aware of the Prime Minister's extravagant spending habits and posh vacations. As struggling Canadians forgo basics and seniors make a choice between groceries and rent, the Prime Minister is choosing between visiting Jamaica and New York. But given his access to the pocketbook of Canadians, he chooses both. What's a $6,000 a night hotel room in London when taxpayers cover it? Or taking a Caribbean vacation when the $80,000 price is covered by a Trudeau Foundation donor? Canadians work hard, many cannot get ahead, yet the Prime Minister has never had it so good. Earlier this month, the PM was in my home province to tell New Brunswick families they should also spend without worrying about the consequences of more debt. At a town hall in Moncton, the Prime Minister explained how borrowing money, as his Liberal government is doing, is just like using a credit card. He actually encouraged New Brunswick families and all Canadians to use your credit card, to use their credit card to pay for things like tuition and home renovation. And he said, I quote, "If you're using your credit card to go back to school or to go into debt to build an expansion on your home, then you're going to be able to sell your home for more." Our Prime Minister is so out of touch, he is urging Canadians to borrow at interest rates as high as 28% without any consequences, he says. It's the same thing he told Canadians about inflation. Inflation will stay low. Homeowners took him at his word, taking out variable mortgage rates that have now gone through the roof and is really making life difficult for millions of Canadians. And this is exactly how the Government of Canada is governing our nation's finances. But, Mr. Speaker, borrowing at 28% does not build wealth. It's a recipe for economic hardship. If you borrow at 28%, your debt will double in 3 short years. That is what the Prime Minister is urging Canadians to do. The projected interest on Canada's debt is going to hit $44 billion this year. That is money we just pay to bondholders. It doesn't fund a single social program. It doesn't help hire another RCMP officer. It doesn't help equip our military. It's money that is going up, being paid off overseas. It's $10 million more than the estimates the government provided in the last fiscal economic update, and it will hit $50 billion in 4 short years. And this is the spiral this government has us in. Rising interest rates because of its debt-fueled spending, twinned with inflation that is making a bad foundation wholly unstable. Nowhere in this budget is there a viable strategy to control spending or offer a plan, even the outline of a balanced budget. Instead, the total debt will top $1.2 trillion this year. And speaking of doubling your debt, that is precisely what this Liberal government has done in 8 short years. They've run up more debt than all governments in Canadian history combined have done. That has us on the road to fiscal ruin. And it gets worse. It doesn't just end with spending, Mr. Speaker. The Liberal carbon tax increased to $65 per ton of emissions this year, resulting in higher prices for gasoline, home heating, fuel, and almost everything in the Canadian economy. Now, Liberals like to point to higher gas prices as something that's caused by the war in Russia. And there's no doubt that war has caused hardship, pressure on supply chains, and rising energy prices. But I point to my riding, which neighbors the state of Maine. And if you cross into Maine and fill up your tank, after the exchange rate, gas is 50% more expensive per litre in New Brunswick than it is in Maine. That is 100% due to energy taxes on gasoline. It has nothing to do with Russia. It has everything to do with how this government is taxing energy to make life more expensive and to make life more painful for Canadian families. And the Liberals are going to triple this carbon tax, raising it from $65 to $175 a ton by 2023. This will be a body blow to the middle class and working families. It will make our manufacturing sector uncompetitive with the United States. Now, I can already hear the Liberals reply that the carbon tax is for a clean environment, but the carbon tax is not an environment plan. It is the largest tax plan in Canadian history. Conservatives do not believe in punishing families for buying groceries or punishing workers for driving to work. Just a few stats, Mr. Speaker, that I think are worth hearing, because as the government likes to talk about their big numbers, let's talk about some items that Canadians are facing every day. Canada's food price report this year predicts that a family of 4 will spend up to $1,065 more on food this year. That's $598 more than the $467 rebate they will receive from Ottawa. Now, look, I was happy to vote for that motion to return dollars to Canadians. The difference is I believe taxes should come down as a principle. The Liberals only cut taxes when they're in political trouble. They have driven up the cost of living in this country, and as a result, they're looking for rescue plans everywhere they can find them. Yet again, their fundamentals are such that this problem is not going to change. We are going to continue to see Canada go down a dark economic road until we turn things around, until we begin to limit the taxes on families and businesses, get our spending in order, and begin to make and build things here in Canada that don't require gobs of subsidies and government regulations. Mr. Speaker, this is why we vote against the budget, and this is why this Liberal government must be replaced as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire. The honourable member for Vancouver, Granville.
Mr. Speaker, I was listening to this speech by my colleague with great interest when he talked about the importance of reducing the cost of living for Canadians. I reflect on some of the things that our government has done, in particular, working with provinces, every single province, to implement affordable childcare. I'd love for the honourable member across to explain to Canadians and explain to us why it is that his party and he voted against and continues to work against $10 a day childcare in this country.
The honourable member for New Brunswick Southwest.
The Liberals are becoming tiresome with their one answer to the affordability crisis. The affordability in this crisis in this country is not just families with children, pardon me, that are facing the struggling as well. It is about pensioners, it is about small businesses, it is about families throughout this economy, whether they're on fixed income, whether they're earning a low or modest wage. So the government needs a better answer to that, as opposed to just ringing on about daycare and their plan on that. This is a problem that if they speak to any senior in their office that come in, are going to talk about the struggles they have in making ends meet.
Commentaire, questions and comments. L'honorable député de Pierre Boucher, les Patriotes Verchères.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'ai trouvé vraiment intéressant le discours de mon collègue conservateur parce que c'est pas mal dans le classique des discours conservateurs. C'est-à-dire, on déchire notre chemise sur la dette, on dit que le gouvernement fédéral dépense trop, puis que le Canada s'endette, puis que c'est l'enfer qui s'en vient pour nos enfants. Et c'est vrai, le gouvernement d'en face n'a fait que des déficits depuis son élection. On en convient. Mais quand on regarde les projections à long terme, ce qu'on constate, en fait, c'est qu'il semblerait, puis c'est admis, qu'éventuellement, le gouvernement canadien, dû à sa capacité fiscale, puis aussi au fait de ses responsabilités minimes, il risque de se retrouver dans une situation d'ici quelques années où le gouvernement fédéral n'aura plus de dette, mais où les provinces vont être en faillite. Alors, j'aimerais savoir comment est-ce qu'il balance ça avec son discours. J'ai l'impression que son discours dépeint une situation catastrophique des finances fédérales, alors que la réalité, c'est que c'est une situation catastrophique des finances des provinces parce que le fédéral, en fait, les aide pas puis garde tout l'argent pour lui.
The honourable member for New Brunswick Southwest.
Et merci, Monsieur le Président. Écoute, c'est des commentaires classiques parce que c'est des politiques qui marchent. On réduit les taxes, on voit qu'il n'y a plus d'activité économique au Canada. Puis en termes de dette, on a besoin aussi des provinces responsables. Comme chez moi, à Nouveau-Brunswick, où le Premier ministre Blaine Higgs a réduit leurs dépenses, puis ils sont présentement dans une position très bien chez moi. Puis c'est la même chose ailleurs au Canada. On a des provinces qui travaillent fort, mais face avec une taxe sur le carbone, puis un gouvernement qui entre dans leur domaine de compétences, c'est difficile. On a un gouvernement qui dépense trop, qui taxe trop, et c'est dur pour les Canadiens.
Question et commentaire, questions and comments. The honourable member for Fredericton.
Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague from my home province of New Brunswick. He made a comment about, trying to support pensioners. And of course, on this side of the House, we do, and we've increased the CPP contributions, and yet our Conservative friends continue to rail against this. I also heard a lot about the carbon tax. And now in New Brunswick, we have the federal backstop where we'll be having, those quarterly payments going to help with affordability measures, and yet, once again, against this. So I'm trying to understand, do we want to help constituents here, or are you really just looking for issues where there aren't any? And, I really think it's time that we get on board with pollution pricing in New Brunswick, because it's a good thing for them, and it's a good thing for, environmental projects like supporting Indigenous communities and schools. So would you repeal those if you had the chance?
Also need to remember to speak through the chair. The honourable member for New Brunswick Southwest.
Would we repeal the carbon tax? Absolutely. The member knows well the reason why Blaine Higgs is no longer administrating the Liberal carbon tax is because it's ruinous to families. So he's out of the game. He doesn't want anything to do with this Liberal carbon tax, just like now 8 out of 10 provinces. But let me point out something this member said, who says she's for a green economy, but opposes nuclear power. And her colleague from St. John Ross scolded her, because if you want power that is carbon dioxide free, just like other Liberals are realizing, you need to embrace nuclear. She's an outlier on that, and her own colleague from New Brunswick, Liberal colleague from New Brunswick, called her out on that, because this fantasy world of high taxes and no energy is just going to result in a ruinous economy and a ruinous country.
Reprise du débat, continuing debate. The Honourable